Welcome to Blooming Wildwood Homestead and today's episode of Homestead Coffee Talk. Today we are going to be discussing the topic of insect farming. Thank you for joining me today. Grab your coffee, tea, water, whatever it is that you are drinking this morning, and let's dive right into this conversation. I would recommend not eating during this video if you happen to be a little bit squeamish about insects and the like. We are going to start off today with an article that I found. I've been doing a little bit of reading over the past few weeks, and one of the magazines that I found at the library, I believe it's the September-October edition, I will link down below for sure, of Mother Earth News. And as I was just perusing the magazine, looking at different articles, one of the headlines caught my attention. In this section written by Amanda Sorrell, the headline reads, "Edible Insects and Food Safety." And it got me to thinking a little bit about some of the things that I have heard. I've heard people talking about using insects for food or using it to supplement proteins or different things like that. And I realized that I haven't really done a lot of research on the topic myself. So I kind of started down this rabbit hole, researching this a little bit more and finding out some more information, mainly because of these first two paragraphs in that said article. It says, though the idea of ingesting insects might make some eaters squirm, the farming of insects to feed livestock and supplement human diets is becoming a more widespread practice. In response, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, recently released a report on edible insects. Looking at edible insects from a food safety perspective, this report covers the risks involved with producing and consuming insects as a food source and provides tips on how to counteract those risks. The risks involved aren't necessarily new. Some of the associated hazards are applicable to all foods, not just insects, and depend on species harvesting methods and processing methods. As I read that, I got to thinking, there must be a lot more to this concept of edible insects than I'm really even aware of. As I started looking into it, there are some different areas, particularly your Middle Eastern, Asian kinds of countries, where they do eat insects. Apparently in some places they are actually a delicacy and people really enjoy them. That's not something that I have experience with, but it is apparently something that is out there in the world that I just haven't really had opportunity to check out. So I was looking a little bit more into the topic of insect farming, and I ran across another article which headlines, "Insect Farming, the industry set to be worth $8 billion by 2030. And this was written by Carissa Law. Again, I will link to this in the description down below. And one of the things right off the bat, it says, the insect farming industry is set to grow at a rate of 27.8% annually, providing cheap, sustainable animal feed and even protein for human consumption. Digging a little bit deeper, mini livestock. I'm not sure if you have kind of thought a little bit about mini livestock on the homestead. When I think mini livestock, I'm thinking of things like maybe your pigs, your sheep, your goats, chickens might all fall under that category of mini livestock. Additionally, small breeds of cows, such as the Dexters, can also be considered mini livestock, and insects. I had no idea that mini livestock includes insects. So then I just was thinking a little bit more about the role that insects play on the homestead and whether or not, I would farm insects as part of my livestock plan. I do want to try to be more self-sustainable and self-sufficient. So do I need to be looking at insects a little bit more? And as I'm thinking about that, bees are a very natural insect to have on the farm. We know that they're great for producing honey. They're great pollinators, which really aids in food production as far as your gardening, your berries, all of that, your orchards. These are going to be a great addition to that. So I could see incorporating bees as part of your mini livestock plan on the homestead and how that could be beneficial. Then I got to thinking about other insects that are around the homestead. We had a lot of trouble last year with aphids, flea beetles, and the cucumber beetles. And all of those types of insects I think of as pests and not something that I would be looking to try to farm. Going back to information that I was reading as I was kind of going through things. 3 of the main types of insects that people have been farming are crickets, mealworms, and black soldier flies. Those 3 insects have been used mainly for their protein in both animal feed and their protein that is able to be provided for human consumption as well. My experience with mealworms is limited. Granted, I have not done any mealworm farming, but I have raised, I guess you could consider it raised, mealworms for school projects in the past. And they're not something that I think I would want to raise on a large scale. However, I could see how it would be really beneficial to supplementing chicken feed, as the chickens could love mealworms and could eat that as an added protein source. All right, so there are some potential benefits. That's one I could see for animals. In reading other articles and other information out there, basically the protein keeps coming up as a pro and a reason to farm insects. They will grind up the insects and use that protein as part of pet food rather than some of the fish meal that they've used in the past, because it's supposed to be more sustainable and easier to farm and get, and it just doesn't take quite as much apparently to go ahead and harvest the insect for that protein powder. The other thing that they've been using insects for is, again, to grind up for meal, and they've used them in flours to make crackers, of all things, and different foods that way. And then in some places, in some countries, they just go ahead and dehydrate them or fry them and bake them, I guess, and eat the crickets and things like that in that regard. And it also is supposed to provide a lot of protein for human consumption as well. When it comes to insect farming, there are people who actually have farms where they raise the animals. I watched a couple of videos on different places where they were doing that. One of them, I think, was over in Sweden, and they were raising crickets. And so they had this whole farm that was set up just to raise crickets in order to produce food for human consumption. And I think also some pet food as well. Everything was in boxes and it was clean and set up with the right kind of environmental factors so that the crickets could thrive in this area. And they were literally breeding, reproducing, harvesting them just like you would other animals, I guess. And apparently it's supposed to be cleaner and not take as much resource to farm these crickets in this way. So the added protein source is something that is being cited as a pro when it comes to farming insect. It takes less resource to get 1 gram or 1 kilogram of insect protein versus, I think they were comparing a lot to cows, because that's where you're seeing the largest difference. And of course we know that there are different people out there who might not be as open to raising cattle for meat and things of that nature. So that tended to be where they did a lot of the comparison between the two. When it came to comparing to chickens, if you're going to farm your insects. It doesn't necessarily have as much benefit because of the amount of resources that go into that environmentally controlled situation for farming the insects. And so therefore, chickens and pork as well, almost balanced out with the cost of farming insects. So those were a couple of the pros for adding insects to your mini farm or to your mini livestock on your farm, or maybe just starting a farm full of insects. Looking at some of the cons, some of the things we really aren't sure what to make of making insects part of our stable diet. There just hasn't been enough research done to say that insects should be a staple of your diet, even though it might be the case that they are high in protein. We just don't know enough about them. Insects, as well as shellfish, are both part of the arthropod family, and therefore we don't know if there might be if people have shellfish allergies, would they also have allergies to insects, being that they come from that same classification and might have some of the same properties. So it's very possible if a person had shellfish allergies, they might also have allergies to insects as well. The second thing that could be detrimental is if insects were mainly wild harvested versus farm raising them, because of the fact that that would cause an imbalance in the ecosystem potentially, and could be very problematic moving forward for the ecosystem balance. The other thing is people don't really know what kind of bacteria and different things you might have, which is I think why they're really promoting having a very clean and controlled environment for farming insects. It was highly touted that their main food source is extra waste when it comes to extra food wastes or animal wastes, and they were saying that that reduces the cost of being able to raise insects. However, then on the flip side of that, I saw information saying, well, if they're eating animal waste, how do we know that some of that bacteria isn't transferring over to whatever or whoever is ingesting that insect? So there were a lot of pros and cons. I just was really surprised that this is such an up and coming thing, something that really is being promoted as maybe being a farming livestock that you would add to your farm. And I really just hadn't even considered insects being mini livestock, first of all, and I hadn't considered, besides bees, even thinking of adding them to the farm and what's going on at the homestead. So I'm not here to say one or the other is right or wrong, but just to kind of present some information that I have found really interesting, and I'm kind of curious to get your opinion. What do you think? Is insect farming something that we need to be looking forward to in the future, or are you already doing it on your homestead? And, you know, or is that something that is just kind of the newest craze, the newest fad that we don't really need to concern ourselves with or invest time into researching? So just some food for thought, an interesting topic of conversation. I thought as I was reading through that magazine, it just really caught my eye. And so I wanted to share that with you today and get some of your feedback on what you are thinking about the whole concept of insect farming. And, you know, do some research for yourself, look into it. It definitely is a bigger thing than I had any idea it could be. And I don't know, if nothing else, it makes for an interesting read this time of year, and you might learn a few things along the way as well. If you found today's topic interesting, feel free to hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, bye everyone.